Hello and welcome to the Addicts Anonymous podcast. I'm your host, Jim Rochelle. Today's episode 260, and we're going to be interviewing Matt. How you doing today, Matt?
Not bad, thank you. Morning, all.
So yeah, you're up there in Maine. How's the weather up in Maine today?
It's actually it's pretty nice today, but I gather we've got about 2 weeks of rain coming. I was actually just in Houston for 2 months. I got back a week ago, so it's very nice to get up here from that weather.
Yeah, it's hot down there. What were you doing in Houston?
So my construction business is based down there. I have to go down there every couple of months, and because it's all getting set up at the moment, so I have to spend a lot of time. I spend the least amount of time there possible, but yeah, every couple of months I have to go down for a few weeks.
Gotcha. All right, well, let's get the party started here and let's talk about your past. So first question I ask everyone, tell me about your childhood and growing up.
So yeah, I had a little bit of a think about this since you told me we would be discussing it. My parents got divorced when I was 5 years old. So I imagine that I imagine I had plenty of therapy to suggest that that's had quite a lot to do with things over the years. My mum is French, so she took my brother and I over to France when I was about 7 after the divorce. And then my brother and I were going sort of back and forth between the UK and then I was in boarding school until I was 16. Then I went to live in Paris again from 16 through to 18. And I did my A levels in France. I'm not sure what the US equivalent is for that. And then I came back to the UK, and then I was in the military for 3 years. Um,
What
yeah,
branch of the military?
I was in the Royal Signals, which is all telecommunications. Um, I think I did that. I was actually a little. It was more lack of options going into the in the military at that time of my life. I was very young, and I mean, it's certainly not a decision I would make now. I don't regret it at all. I'm very proud of it. But yeah, I think it was more a result of me being lost for so long, which I guess we'll get into more detail as the interview progresses.
So what was it like growing up in a divorced household? I mean, I kind of know because I my parents were divorced when I was 8, but how did it affect you?
So, I mean, what I can remember is being very defensive. We stayed with our mother, and I can remember that it was very difficult for her. She didn't have a lot of money, and I can remember even as a very young man, only 5 or 6 years old, being very defensive of my mother and wanting to try and help, and obviously being unable to because I was only a young kid, um, and I honestly don't remember a huge amount from a lot of my childhood, which again, through going through therapy, apparently is quite common. Um, and because there's probably a lot of things that I wanted to forget, but I remember it being it was an unhappy time. My mum was upset for a long time, and then her sister passed away from cancer. As I say, my mum was French, obviously, so was her sister. They both moved over to the UK and married English guys. And her elder sister died of cancer around about that time as well. So I think my mum, that she died in 87, so about 2 years after the divorce. I think my mother said, "That's it. I've had enough of the UK," and took my brother and I back to France with her. And that's right. So we were in France for about a year, and I think we were both very unhappy. And my mum got some child psychologists involved, and they basically said to her, "Your kids have got to go back to the UK. They miss the UK. They're not happy here." So I think against my mother's better judgment, certainly her instincts, she decided to send us back to the UK, where my father was, and he put us into boarding school. which I think in retrospect was not a fantastic move. I mean, my little brother is 2 years younger than me. He was only 7 to go into boarding school. And then,
What
yeah,
was
he and
boarding
I,
school like?
oh, it's fucking horrible, mate.
Yeah.
It's a real jungle. As actually, I was talking to a friend about that the other day. I don't miss school at all. I can remember when I was at school. I can remember a lot of my dad's friends and stuff saying, you know, you should enjoy it. They're the best days of your life. I absolutely hated it. I wouldn't wish boarding school on my worst enemy. It was a real jungle. But then again, having said that, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, I think it was pretty tough, but no more than, you know, for everybody else. um I think that a lot of my problems in my life have arisen from the fact that I was probably a slightly oversensitive kid, and the things that I went through tended to affect me perhaps more than they should have done.
What kind of things were you sensitive to?
I mean, I can remember being really unhappy at boarding school. I didn't want to be at boarding school. I wanted to be at home with my folks. But I think it could, because it started so early. I was what, 9 or 10 when I first went to boarding school. I guess I probably put it in my head that, you know, this is it. This is the way the world is. So you just put your head down and you deal with it. But for 6 years, I really didn't. I really didn't enjoy it. I think I was a weekly boarder for quite a few years. So I would go home on the weekends, and I hated going back so much. My dad did in the end. He didn't like to take me. It was about a 45-minute drive from my dad's house back to boarding school. He would actually get a cab driver to come and pick me up and take me back every weekend because I just didn't like it. So I guess maybe there was some trauma from that. I don't know, but I it wasn't too bad, mate. You know, nobody fucking died.
Yeah. That's always a plus.
Yeah.
Were they rough with you guys? Did they hit you and stuff?
Yeah, man, normal stuff. Not so much. There was still physical punishment when I was a young man. I'm 44 now. So there was some. We used to get the back of our hands would be slapped with rulers, but it was more what the bigger boys would kick the shit out of you when you got there.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, you get older and then end up doing the same yourself. So I'm guessing pretty standard stuff. You know, and there were, of course, some great times as well. But I think for me personally, and for my brother, I don't think it was the right move in retrospect. I think we would have been better off staying at home. But you know, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Mm. In retrospect, again, talking with my family, they do regret that. But my father went to boarding school. His father went to boarding school. You know, um, so yeah. I think it also, because I've been in an institution so long, because that's what boarding school is, that's what prison is, that's what the army is. They're institutions. I think it made it easier for me to actually go into the military, a period of my life that, as difficult as it was, and I never went operational, by the way. I want to make that clear. I never actually went into operational theatre. But it was still difficult. But I think I've been prepped by the fact I've been in boarding school for so long to be able to go in and do that. Now, when I finally decided to leave the military, when I was 22, and I went over to Australia, that's when all, you know, I was getting into adulthood, and I guess that's where all the real problems sort of began, as a result of having been in institutions pretty much for what, 10 years. I wanted to let my hair down, I guess. And I
Yeah.
really have.
So, what did you do once you graduated boarding school?
So when I finished up my A levels in France, I was at an international school in France, and I came back because my mother moved over to the United States at that time. Right when I finished, I decided to move back to the UK from France, and I spent sort of like a year doing nothing, bumming around, which my dad just would not have, obviously. And then I joined the military. after about a year of being in the UK. And as I say, I was in the military for yeah, 2.5, 3 years.
And what did you do that? What did you do after the military?
Okay, so after the military, it all really began. My stepfather had a big job with in oil and gas, and that's why they'd been sent out to Australia. I wanted to come out. I wanted to go out and visit them. So as soon as I left the military I remember this because it was just before 9/11 that I went out there, and I fell in love with it. And for a year, I stayed with my folks whilst they were out there, and then they left, and I stayed. I stayed with a girlfriend there, and I managed to get a pretty good job, and with an English flooring company. They sent me over. I was in Perth for 3 years. The company then sent me over to Brisbane, to Queensland, for it was kind of a promotion to put me on the road as a salesman. And I think I really enjoyed it. But after 2 years of being there, I got very homesick and I left. I dropped everything and went back to the UK. So I went back to the UK in 2006. So I've been out there for 5 years. And when I was back in the UK, I landed a pretty decent job, and I moved in. I had a girlfriend I moved in with there, and I was in the UK until 2010. In 2010, we broke up, and I decided to come over and visit my mum, who'd been living over. And in fact, both my brothers and sister were over in the US as well. So I went over for a visit. And within a couple of months, I decided I loved it, and I stayed there, and I ended up getting a job through ConocoPhillips as a logistics manager. And believe it or not, the job was based in Queensland again on the APLNG pipeline project. So yeah, 2011 through to 2014, I was back out there again. That was a pretty interesting time in my life because it was a great gig to have, and being in Australia again, and I was on a rotation, 28 days on, 9 days off, so I was flying back to the US with lots and lots of money on my days off. And when that finished up in 2014 or 15, I came back with my Australian fiance. We came back to the US. It's pretty difficult times because I was trying to get my green card through family. And that actually got mistakenly rejected in 2015. And at the same time, I lost my job because of that. And my Australian fiance left me. It's a pretty shitty year. And she went back to Australia. And then I stayed in Houston, and I've been in Houston ever since. I ended up going to treatment, and that was the worst sort of 7 years. I got into drugs very, very badly. I had a good job with French oil and gas company in Houston, so I was relatively wealthy, but I wasted it all on drugs and girls and fast cars. Um,
So
then
when did the heavy drug use start?
I was interested in drugs from a very young age. My dad, one of the first things I remember my dad saying to me when I was a young man was, "You've got a pretty unhealthy, a pretty unhealthy interest in drugs." And I'm guessing, and well, I say guessing. Obviously, I've been through a lot of therapy to arrive at the conclusion that I just the one thing that always made things better or softer for me were drugs or alcohol. So the heavy drinking was a problem all through my younger times. I smoked a lot of marijuana until I was about 27 or 28. So the drinking wasn't so bad, I guess. I stopped when I was 27 or 28 because I started getting like memory blocks. But instead of smoking pot, I'd drink 3 bottles of red wine every night. Um, but it was relatively sustainable. I was a young man. I certainly wasn't operating at my top levels because I was drinking too much at night times. So I was a problem drinker, not an alcoholic. And at that time in the UK, we're going at the moment in sort of like between 2006 and 2010. Before I came to the US, I was dabbling in cocaine and things like that. And then I developed I developed an addiction to codeine because you could buy. That's right. You could buy codeine over the counter in the UK. It was called like Panadine Forte, I think. And I found a way to extract the codeine from the pills, and take out the ibuprofen.
How'd
So
you do
yeah,
that?
it's a pretty disgusting process whereby, again, memory serves, because we're going back 14, 15 years. You would separate it by crushing it up, putting it in some water with something else I can't remember. And then, of course, codeine fully dissolves in water. So then I would strain the liquid through a sock, and then you would neck the liquid very fast, which tasted absolutely foul. But I did it because I was addicted to it. That went on for about 7 or 8 months. Then, when I broke up with my girlfriend at the time and I came over to the US, I had to go cold turkey. And I'll never forget, that was really, really bad. For a month, I was very, very sick. I lost 30% body weight, and vowed that I would never do it again. Famous last words. But then, of course, as I said before, I managed to, through some friends, I landed a really good job in Australia where you constantly got drug tested, etc. And because we were on site where we had an alcohol breath test every morning at 5 a.m. That's what Australia's like. It kind of kept me out of trouble, I guess, the 3 years that I was on that project and over there. It kept my nose relatively clean. Having said that, whenever I came back to the US, on my days off, as I said, it was 28 on, 9 off. It would be, I'd have 20 grand to blow on drugs and girls. So by the time I got back to Australia, for the next 28 days, I remember I had a friend of mine from the company. He could just tell by looking at me saying, what the hell have you just done to yourself? But I had the 28 days on there to get fit and well, and I wasn't drinking and I wasn't doing anything. So relatively healthy. So in answer to your question, it got really bad after my Australian fiance left me in August of 2015. I'd lost my job. I'd been incorrectly rejected my green card. It was all resolved a few months later, but that didn't help me at the time. From that period, when after she left in July 2015, up until 18 months ago when I went to rehab, was the worst period of my life. And I was addicted to GHB. I was constantly, like, a quiet night in for me during the week would be 3 bottles of red wine and a Xanax, because I'd taken so much Adderall during the day, which I was getting prescription from a doctor who was also giving me Ambien, Xanax. And in fact, she was giving me 100 milligrams of Vyvanse at the time. And, I guess it's not really her fault. She didn't realize what she was dealing with. And that went on, for a while. And as I said, I also, during that time, I was introduced to GHB and got heavily addicted to that. And that was the first time where I had to go to hospital because of my drug problems, and so that would have been in 2019. As a result of that, I was in hospital for like 8 days. My brother had to fly back from Africa because my family weren't in Houston at the time, and they wouldn't release me. The hospital wouldn't release me as a family member. So I guess I tried. That's right. I tried to go into rehab myself because I had a good job with an oil and gas company as a contracts manager, and so I booked myself into a clinic to try and get off GHB, and I couldn't even spend one night there. I said to the doctor, I've got to go. Can you just give me the same medication and I'll do this at home on my own? And he said, I really don't advise it, obviously, but we cannot keep you here by law. If you really want to go, come and see me in the morning and I'll give you all the drugs that you need. He gave me all the drugs that I needed. And after about a week, I was picked up wandering around in my underwear in our parking lot at 3 a.m. And the police could tell that I wasn't criminal, just that I was very intoxicated. So they then took me to hospital. And you would have thought that would have been enough, for me, but I hadn't. I don't think I was ready. For some reason, I wasn't ready to go and get treatment. And I did some outpatient treatment, which helped a little bit, but it wasn't enough. I had to really reach rock bottom. And that was in October, just before my birthday in 2021. I'd started a construction company about 8 months before that, which had done so well with my business partner. We were making tons of money, but I was just spending it on Vicodin, hydrocodone, oxycodone, and freebasing a lot. And I also was dabbling back in GHB. I crashed my Mercedes on the freeway because I passed out. I'd taken too much GHB in October 2021. And that was the moment for me, because I should have been dead. There's multiple times in my life where a lot of people say this, they don't know what it really means. I really should have been dead. And because a couple of times I had a Camaro ZL1 in Houston, and twice I wrapped it around a fucking light post at 3 o'clock in the morning, so drunk I couldn't even remember. Both times I got up in the morning and I didn't know why my car wasn't in the parking lot. That's how drunk I've been. So I told my parents and my poor mum, who'd seen me many times over the years in states that no mother should have to see her son. That point really was a wake-up call for me, and the long and short of it was that I lost my business. I needed to get away from everything, and my family really wanted me to go in for treatment, so I did, and it took, and it's been a tough 18 months, but I'm finding ways to sustain it, and I think age has a lot to do with it as well. I don't know what your next question was going to be, but I'm just talking now.
No.
I think, yeah.
My question was, what do you think made it stick this time?
I think age has a lot to do with it. I'm tired. I just, again, I went back to Houston for work, and so all of the temptation was there, and of course I had to face all of my old demons because I'd been away for a year. I just, as I said, I left after rehab. I just spent a lot of time with family. I've got family in France, so I went over there for a few months, and I've got family up in Maine, and it was exactly what I needed to just be away from everything, and it's worked. That's so what's made it stick was a combination of things. I say age first. I'm not sure that's the most important factor. I don't know, but I came so close to the edge. I realized how much I'd hurt everyone. And I mean, it's a weird one because when I was in rehab, I guess I was finally ready for it. I should have gone to rehab 15 years before I did, but it would never. And as I said, 3 or 4 years before that, I was within an outpatient program, which just didn't really take because I wasn't ready. So I guess I was ready. I mean, there were a lot of people who came out of it, and I was amazed to see that they were drinking the day after they got out. So it kind of it took away the credibility of the whole thing at the time, but it hasn't, because it stuck with me. And I don't know why it stuck with me when the 7 or 8 people I was really good friends with during rehab, because it's somewhere where you finally go and you share everything, so you get close with people. All of them within a few days of finishing were back doing what they had been in rehab for. So I didn't really get it. I didn't stay in touch with any of them, and I didn't go to any meetings because I wanted to stay on this path. And I mean, again, in answers to your question, I think the secret for me has been to be happy alone again. I have never, ever been happy in my adult life on my own. I've always needed to be around people, a clown, making people laugh, loved by girls, always in relationships, the wrong relationships, being codependent. And so after rehab and after not drinking and taking lots of drugs. And my brain was beginning to learn how to do that because I've been drinking for 20, 25 years and taking lots of drugs for years. Um, I finally, began reading books again and just enjoying peace and quiet. And I think that's been the main factor in possibly sustaining sobriety for the rest of my life. Because the next time I fall back into what I was doing, I'm it's all over for me. There's no doubt about that. Again, I'm quite happy because I just went back to Houston, where it would have been very easy for me to order up lots of coke and go freebasing, doing all that. I didn't want to do any of it. I actively stayed away from all of it. It's very difficult because I have good friends I've known for 10 years there who I had to completely cut off. And of course, I was bumping into a lot of people who I'd enjoyed their company when not sober. But once you're sober, believe me, 90% of the people you were hanging around with just become boring to you, or they did to me. So it's lonely, it's tough, but it's not so lonely when you start to learn to like yourself again, and you get a little bit of peace and quiet, and you start to covet being alone. You start to covet, and not in an unhealthy way, not being a recluse. I'm still sociable, and I like to, I like to meet new people. I like to talk to people, but to learn. And I don't know if this is a generic thing that's going to help anyone else, but for me, I can only speak for me. Learning to be on my own has been, again, I think the thing that's going to help me sustain this for good. I mean, I was given medication, obviously all non-narcotic medication in rehab, which I've continued to take. One is a blood pressure medication, because I was suffering from severe hypertension. In fact, not verbatim, but I think one of the nurses when I first got to rehab was like, you've been on the verge of having major heart attacks, embolisms, because I was sitting there at something like 230 over 150 on my blood pressure.
That's crazy.
So yeah, but GHB, which I'd just been doing a lot of, tends to do that. When the first time I passed out on a main road on Westheimer in Houston, midday on a Saturday, driving back from watching footy. Obviously, I'm a big footy fan. I'm English. I woke up at my steering wheel, and there were police, fire engines, and ambulances everywhere. And the police officer, once I came to, was like, "Are you okay? All right, come out of the car, stand up." And I went in. The ambulance guys, who I've always found incredible, the fire people and the ambulance guys in Houston have always been amazing. They took me into the ambulance and they said, "Look, mate, you've got to tell us. We've run tests and we cannot find anything in your blood, yet your blood pressure is dangerously high. We can't release you." And of course, I didn't tell them I had a bottle of GHB in my pocket because I got away with it. And it actually happened when you take a little bit too much GHB, you pass out or die. It's a very dangerous drug. And yeah, it happened again a couple of weeks later. Sorry, I can't forget where I was going with that. What was the question?
No, you were just talking about your GHB and how it happened a few weeks later.
Yeah, I can't explain why for what it took. I guess, yeah, the original part, what it took for me to get to that stage. It was age, and I'd had enough. I'll never forget it because it was the day before my birthday that I crashed my Mercedes because I'd passed out because I'd taken a little bit too much GHB, October 21. And I mean, I didn't even know right at that moment that was it. But I was in the next few days, I was in such a dark place. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't go anywhere. And, I finally, my family, they got involved. My business partner had got them involved, which ultimately was a good move. And yeah, it ended up 4 or 5 weeks later, I went into rehab, and here we are. And I think the main thing I've taken from the last 18 months that I would say to other people is to learn to to learn to like yourself again, you've got to learn to be okay alone. You don't need approval from other people. You don't need to conform. You don't need to be around other people, and you don't need these things in your head to sort of make you feel different. You can. I've learned to be happy, sober in my head on my own, and that's what I know. Again, that's what I know makes it sustainable. But I don't know if that's relevant to others or just me.
No, that's definitely relevant to others. Absolutely.
And going through rehab was fucking heartbreaking. Just to see, because there's always people that have it worse than you. I'm not typically someone that sits around feeling sorry for myself, but it was a very humbling. Yeah, that's another thing, is humility. To learn humility. I was a cocky, horrible little twat for so many years, and I guess, yeah, after that, I felt I wanted things. I wanted real things. I wanted, all of my relationships had been fake, with friends, with girlfriends, even with my family. It had all been manufactured. I was a huge manipulator, and I didn't want all of these things. Almost immediately after rehab, I found repulsive, and I didn't want them anymore. I wanted to try and not be, I mean, I don't want to say even a better person. I just wanted to try and be, and have a bit of normality in my life. And I was tired of it. It had been nearly 10 years of very, very living right up close to the edge. And yeah, I didn't want it anymore. And now it's only been 18 months. It's repulsive to me. As I said, I just went to Houston, where it could have been all handed to me on a plate, and I wasn't interested in the slightest. So it's doable.
That it is. It is doable. It is
It's
gotta you gotta for some reason most of us have to hit rock bottom.
yeah,
There's
we
really
do.
no story I hear where something doesn't happen traumatic or some kind of event in their life that changes everything.
So a very good friend of mine who I saw down in Houston from back home from the UK is a major sex addict, and and he's a really bright, very kind guy, and he's got a wonderful partner, but of course he cheats on her, and it kind of, my therapy sort of kicked in a little bit with him to try and help him through it. But he's actually, because of what I was explaining, what I've just been through, he's actually seeking treatment himself now, because, as you probably know, sex addiction is at the center of obsession. It's at the center of all addiction, or a big part of it. Drugs come with that. But just to watch how, because people are still very ignorant about addiction. They're told that it is an illness, but they don't realize what kind of an illness it is. When you say illness, it means that you're doing something that you're not really making a conscious, balanced decision to do. You're destroying yourself, and you don't know why you're doing it. It's a very nasty place to be. And I just saw that firsthand with him. This is a 40-year-old guy who would love to have children with his partner, but the second he gets away, he's trying to have sex with other women. It's an addiction, and he's doing drugs and things like that. It's all tied in. It's a very dark, complicated place, and I don't think I'll ever truly figure it out. But it doesn't matter to me, because, touch wood, I've got through the worst of it, and I'm finding ways to sustain it. If I'm being completely honest, I do take an anti-craving medication, which I know is mildly, drug related, but it is sustainable. It's controlled with a doctor, and it does stop me because the biggest problems in my life have always been painkillers, always been opioids, and alcohol. And I don't really have that issue. So I take a melatonin, before bed. Sometimes I take a little bit of a CBD cigarette, but I wake up fit, because sleep is very closely tied into addiction, especially through my childhood. I could never sleep. And of course, if you drink 3 bottles of red wine, you're going to sleep, or you're going to think you're going to sleep very, very well. So a lot of it was always tied into sleeping badly. And now I've found ways I exercise every day. I make sure that, come 9 p.m. I'm tired and I want to go to bed and sleep. And again, after 40, everything's fucking tiring. so
Yeah.
so that helps. And now I really have I really want a healthy, balanced life. And who knows, I might even meet a nice girl and be able to finally settle down. But that's a story unto itself, because as I've been saying, I've become so happy at being alone. I'd be hugely reluctant to let anybody in to that might jeopardize the path I'm on now.
Yeah, I feel
But
the
that,
same way about that. It's just very,
right.
very weary.
Mm-hmm. People are generally so enamored with money and material things, as I was for so long. And I know that I could ring out cliche after cliche here, about the best things in life being free and things like that, but they absolutely are. Um, and once you learn to enjoy the simple things again, like getting out into the country and go walking or look at animals, if that's your thing, go traveling, whatever it is that doesn't involve toxicity, putting toxicity into your body, find it and do it, and it doesn't have to be a life-changing hobby. Again, it can just be the simplest things. When I first came up to Maine just after rehab, and I was able to do things that I hadn't done for 10 years, like walk quietly in the woods or up in the hills, it really changed things a lot. And then you start to become more in tune with your healthy self, and then it becomes habit. And I hope, if I'm making too much sense, I'm trying to be as honest as possible.
No, it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. It's glad to hear you're doing so well. You're
Yeah.
keeping your life together, making sure you're doing what you need to do to stay sober.
Yeah, I do. I feel quite lucky because I've had a great family behind me, and I did have the opportunity to get away. Which, if I was talking to anybody who was in my situation, and I know thousands of people are, that it's to get away. You need to drop your work. You need to drop. You need to drop the person that you're with, because whoever you're with and is allowing you to behave like that is an enabler, whether you like it or not. You need to drop everything and you need to get away. You need to get away. You need to go somewhere where there is nothing and nobody. You need to go out deep into the country. That's what worked for me. You need to change everything, and you need to do it for a few months for it to take. Then that would be my advice. That's what's worked for me. You need to get away and drop everything. You need to lose everything and then rebuild it. Very difficult thing to do, to let go.
Yeah, that is not an easy task.
It isn't. That's the biggest thing I saw with relapses back in Houston is how can you expect to go and get treatment and maintain that treatment when you go straight back into the lifestyle, the same friends, the same places, you're exposed to all the same things. How are you ever going to stand a chance? You don't. You have to plan. It was whilst I was in rehab, my family's so wonderful. They'd already planned it for me. My ticket was bought for me to go and spend 3 months in Europe with my family before I even finished. I had no choice, but I felt very much I owed my family so much, because I don't have too many regrets, to be honest with you. I've had the time of my life. I really have. I've had a great time with some great memories. But the one thing that is awful is what I did to my family. That I do regret, and that I try very, very hard to fix every day, because nobody deserves to see somebody that they love go through that shit and do that shit to themselves. No
Yeah,
one
no.
deserves it. Yeah.
Well, you got
I'm
quite the
trying to,
story.
yeah, yeah. I hope I didn't talk too much, and as I say, I don't think I'm a special case or anything like that. I do this if it can help one person, wonderful.
All right, my friend. So seems like we're wrapping up here. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add in there?
No, not really, mate. I've told you everything that's happened. Just if, anyone that listens, stay strong, keep going and learn to love yourself again on your own. Get some peace and quiet. It's the most important thing of all.
Yeah. All right, my friend, do me a favor, sit tight for just a minute and we do our little ending here. So for everybody that's watching and listening, I hope you like what you saw and heard today. If you did, go below, give us a like, and also subscribe to see when we upload new videos. Addicts Anonymous is on all social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, you name it, we're on it. I also suggest checking out our website, which is www.addicts-anonymous.com. There's plenty of free resources as well as free literature. Also, Addicts Anonymous has a book out. It's called Addicts Anonymous, Our Stories. It's a collection of people's personal stories, as well as I wrote on a number of different topics and a number of different drugs. So it's got a good compilation of information in there. That's available on Amazon and Kindle. And once again, it's called Addicts Anonymous, Our Stories. So that's all we have for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll catch you next time.